What if your entire life was built on a lie? Imagine being told for years that you were infertile only for the truth to come crashing down in the most unexpected way. Meet Michael, a man who thought he had it all figured out until one chance encounter with his ex-wife Rebecca forces him to face a painful secret that has haunted him for 15 years. But that's just the beginning. What happens when old wounds reopen and the truth about his son Nathan is revealed? Secrets, pride, and heartbreak collide in this roller coaster journey where nothing is as it seems and everything Michael thought he knew about himself is called into question. Will he find redemption, or will the truth destroy him? Keep watching as this story unfolds, because what Michael discovers next will change everything. It was a typical sunny afternoon when Rebecca sat by the window of a cozy cafe gazing out at the clear skies. She was lost in the peaceful moment, waiting for her lunch to arrive, but she had no idea that today would be one of the most life-changing days of her life. It was just another day or so, she thought. As she stood up to head to the bathroom, Rebecca accidentally bumped into a young boy. She quickly apologized, and as she looked up, her breath caught in her throat. Standing right there in front of her, staring at her with wide eyes, was none other than Michael, her ex-husband, the man who had left her 15 years ago. She hadn't seen him since their bitter divorce, and now here he was. Time had passed, but the emotions flooded back, memories of their shared past swirling in her mind. Rebecca froze for a moment, unsure of how to react. It had been so long since she had seen him, yet his arrogant demeanor, as though nothing had changed, brought back all the frustrations and unanswered questions from their past. Michael, with his usual coldness, looked at her and casually asked, "Are you still alone? Still single?" The arrogance in his voice made Rebecca's skin crawl, but she smiled despite the bitterness building inside her. Michael introduced the young boy beside him with a smug grin. "This is my son, Austin. He's a genius, just like my new wife, Sarah." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat. She had hoped that after all these years, Michael might have changed, but seeing him here acting as superior as ever reminded her why their marriage had fallen apart in the first place. Their marriage had been built on promises of a family, on dreams of having children together. But as the years passed and their attempts to conceive failed, the cracks in their relationship deepened. Michael, too proud to consider any medical help, insisted that the issue lay with Rebecca. He couldn't fathom that the problem might lie with him. The endless accusations, the bitterness, and the lack of compassion had driven them apart. Rebecca had tried to move on, to heal from the pain of the past, but now, standing face to face with the man who had once been her, everything, it felt like no time had passed at all. "I see you've moved on," Rebecca said, keeping her tone neutral, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael looked at her with that same indifferent expression. "I have," he replied. "I found a family, a son, someone who truly matters." Rebecca's eyes briefly glanced at the boy standing beside Michael. Austin appeared polite, well-mannered, and intelligent, the complete opposite of the young boy Michael had been years ago. But something about this encounter felt wrong. As they exchanged pleasantries, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something deep inside Michael. She noticed the flicker of surprise in his eyes as they spoke, but before she could question it, her son Ethan appeared from the hallway. Ethan was 15 now, a tall and caring young man who had always been Rebecca's rock. He had grown into someone she was proud of, someone she could rely on. As he approached, he gave her a knowing look, sensing her discomfort. "Is everything okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Rebecca smiled warmly at him, relieved by his presence. "Yes, Ethan. Everything is fine," she assured him, leaning down to kiss him on the cheek. She turned to Michael. "I'd like you to meet my son. This is Ethan." When Michael saw Ethan, his face turned pale. His eyes widened in shock as his mind raced. Ethan was already 15 years old, which meant, could this be his son? The thought rocked him to his core. He hadn't seen Rebecca since their divorce, but the boy looked so familiar. The resemblance was undeniable. Rebecca noticed the surprise on Michael's face and couldn't help but wonder if he was finally seeing the truth. She had been pregnant when they separated, but she had never told him. Why would she? After all, he had left her with nothing but harsh words and broken promises. She had raised Ethan alone, and she wasn't about to change that now. The moment was interrupted when the waiter arrived with Rebecca's lunch, giving her a chance to escape the tension in the air. She excused herself and went to sit with Ethan, leaving Michael standing there, his mind reeling from the unexpected revelation. As Rebecca sat down with Ethan, she tried to keep her composure, but she could feel Michael's eyes on her. She could almost hear the questions running through his mind. Could Ethan really be his son? Had Rebecca kept this secret all these years? Back at his table, Michael's thoughts were a whirlwind. The proud facade he had carefully constructed over the years crumbled as he considered the possibility that Ethan was his son. He had never believed in the idea of infertility. It had always been Rebecca's problem, not his. But now seeing the boy standing before him, the doubt gnawed at him. Could it be possible? Could Ethan be his son? He thought of all the years he had spent with Sarah, his new wife, and how quickly they had started their family with Austin. The timing felt too uncanny. Was it really possible that Rebecca had been pregnant when they divorced and never told him? The thoughts tormented Michael. Should he confront Rebecca? Should he demand the truth? As he sat there lost in his thoughts, Sarah and Austin continued eating, oblivious to the internal storm brewing inside Michael. As the days passed, the unsettling encounter at the cafe replayed in Michael's mind over and over again. He couldn't shake the image of Rebecca's son, Ethan, standing there so poised and mature. The way he had looked at Rebecca with such care, his protective instinct evident in his voice, made something stir deep inside Michael. For the first time in years, he questioned everything. He thought he knew about his past, his marriage, and the choices he made. What bothered him even more was how familiar Ethan looked. His features, his mannerisms, they were so similar to Michael's. But how could this be possible? Michael had always believed that infertility had been Rebecca's issue. It was a truth he had clung to for so long, a truth that had justified his decision to leave her all those years ago. He never imagined that the problem could be his. The more he thought about it, the more the questions gnawed at him. Could Ethan be his son? Could Rebecca have kept this from him all these years? And if so, why? Why wouldn't she have told him the truth? Days turned into weeks, and Michael's mind was consumed by these unanswered questions. He tried to push the thoughts aside, telling himself that his life with Sophie and Austin was perfect. He had built a new family, a new life, one that he was proud of. But every time he saw Austin, every time he looked at his wife, Sophie, his mind would drift back to Ethan, to Rebecca, and to the possibility that he might have another child out there, a son he never knew existed. But the thought of confronting Rebecca, of opening this can of worms, terrified him. What would Sophie think? What would Austin think? Could they accept the truth if it turned out that Nathan, the boy they had come to know as Rebecca's son, was actually his? Could this revelation tear apart the life he had so carefully built? Michael's pride, his carefully constructed world, was beginning to unravel. Yet deep down he knew he couldn't let this go. The truth had to come out. No matter how difficult or painful it might be, he had to know. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued to live her life, trying to move forward after the unexpected reunion. She had hoped the past with Michael was behind her, but the encounter had reopened old wounds she had long buried. She had raised Ethan alone, given him the life she never had, and now here was Michael questioning everything she had built. She couldn't deny the rush of emotion she felt when she saw him again, but she also couldn't ignore the deep resentment that bubbled up inside her. After everything he had put her through, after leaving her when she needed him the most, he now had the audacity to question the paternity of her son. It was infuriating. The tension between them lingered in the air unspoken, but thick as each of them wrestled with their own feelings and insecurities. Neither of them knew what the other was truly thinking, but both of them were determined to find out the truth. One evening, Michael could no longer hold it in. He had spent the last few weeks in turmoil, haunted by the idea that Nathan might be his son. He called Rebecca, his fingers trembling as he dialed her number. When she answered, there was an awkward silence before Michael spoke. "Rebecca, I need to see you. There's something we need to talk about," he said, his voice shaky but resolute. Rebecca was taken aback. She hadn't expected to hear from him again after their encounter at the cafe, but something in his voice told her this was serious. She hesitated, then reluctantly agreed to meet him. The following day, they met at a quiet park near Rebecca's house. Michael was already waiting when Rebecca arrived. He stood there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his eyes searching the ground as if trying to gather the courage to speak. When Rebecca walked up to him, she crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what you want from me, Michael," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "What do you want to talk about?" Michael took a deep breath, his gaze lifting to meet hers. "It's about Nathan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't stop thinking about him. I can't stop thinking about the possibility that he might be my son." Rebecca's heart skipped a beat, the words hung in the air, and for a moment time seemed to freeze. She didn't know how to respond. She had kept this secret for so long, convinced that Michael would never know the truth. Now here he was, asking her, demanding an answer. "Michael, Rebecca started, but her words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain everything. How could she possibly make him understand? "Please just tell me." Michael said, his voice softer now, almost pleading, "Is Nathan my son?" Rebecca took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The weight of the truth was heavy on her chest. She had never wanted to hurt Michael, never wanted to expose the pain that had kept her up at night, but now standing face to face with him, the moment had come. She had no choice but to tell him the truth. "Michael, no, Nathan is not your son," she said, her voice steady but firm. "He's Gregory's son, my husband's son. I'm sorry if that's not the answer you wanted, but it's the truth." Michael's face fell. He had expected this answer, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. He had lived with the doubt for so long, hoping for a different outcome, but now the truth was inescapable. "You've moved on," Michael whispered almost to himself. "You've built a life without me." Rebecca nodded, her heart heavy. "I had to, Michael. I couldn't wait for you forever. I couldn't wait for you to come to your senses. I had to take care of myself and Ethan. I couldn't keep hoping for something that wasn't going to happen." There was a long silence between them. Neither of them knew what to say next. The truth had been spoken, but the consequences were still unclear. Finally, Michael spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I should have believed in you. I should have trusted you, but I didn't." Rebecca looked at him, her eyes softening despite the bitterness that still lingered in her heart. "It's too late for apologies, Michael. We both made choices. Now we have to live with them." As Michael stood there taking in her words, he realized that the past could never be rewritten. No matter how much he wanted to go back and change things, he couldn't. The life he had with Sophie, with Austin, was the life he had now. But something had shifted inside him. The truth had forced him to confront his own mistakes, his own pride, and the consequences of his actions. As the weeks passed after that fateful conversation, Michael's life began to shift in ways he never expected. The encounter with Rebecca had been a revelation, opening up old wounds he thought had long since healed. But the truth was, it had also opened a door to something new, something more meaningful than anything he could have imagined before. For Michael, the truth about Nathan had shattered his beliefs, but it had also forced him to confront himself in ways that were painful yet necessary. His once unshakable pride, the pride that had kept him distant from Rebecca and others, was now crumbling. What he had once perceived as weakness, he now recognized as strength. The pain of his infertility diagnosis had clouded his judgment for years, pushing him away from those he loved and preventing him from seeing the truth about what truly mattered. While Rebecca and Nathan had their own lives to live, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He realized he couldn't go back and undo the years of bitterness and pain between him and Rebecca. But there was one thing he could do. He could finally become the man he needed to be for Sophie and Austin, the family he had built. No more lies, no more pride. It was time for honesty, for growth, and for healing. As for Sophie, the confrontation with Rebecca had shaken her deeply. She could see the weight of the revelation on Michael's face, and although she tried to remain composed, her heart ached for him. Sophie loved him, but she knew that trust once broken was a fragile thing. She didn't know if they could ever go back to how they were, but she was willing to try if Michael was. However, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that the secrets from Michael's past were far from over. Sophie had always believed in the strength of their marriage, but now faced with the truth, she had to confront a reality she hadn't prepared for. Could she accept the possibility that Michael had fathered a child with Rebecca? Could she truly forgive him, knowing the depth of his past mistakes. As for Austin, he was blissfully unaware of the complexities of his parents' lives. All he knew was that his family was in turmoil, and he couldn't understand why. The truth about Nathan hadn't been revealed to him yet, but Michael knew that when the time came, it would change everything. How would Austin feel knowing that his father wasn't his biological parent? How would he reconcile that with the love he had for him? Rebecca, on the other hand, had made peace with the life she had built. She had been through so much and had come out stronger on the other side. Nathan, her son, had grown into a kind-hearted, intelligent young man, and although life hadn't been easy, it had been theirs to live. But seeing Michael again had stirred something deep within her memories of a love. She once had a love that had been tainted by misunderstanding and pride. She had made peace with the fact that Nathan wasn't Michael's son, but the feeling of closure didn't come as easily as she thought. She realized that despite everything, a part of her still longed for what could have been. But as much as she wished things had turned out differently, she knew that she had to look forward. Life was about moving on, about creating new stories and memories. The conversation between Michael and Rebecca had brought the past to light, but it had also given them a chance to understand each other in a way they never had before. They didn't have to be together to understand each other. In fact, it was their separation that had allowed them to grow and learn from their mistakes. As time went on, Michael and Sophie began to rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to bear, but they took it one step at a time. Michael was determined to make amends, to be a better man for Sophie and for Austin. He learned to let go of the pride that had defined him for so long and opened himself up to vulnerability, to love, and to forgiveness. Sophie, in turn, allowed herself to heal. She saw the man Michael was becoming, and she began to believe that their relationship could be stronger than ever. It wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about accepting it and choosing to move forward together. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Michael turned to Sophie with a smile that reached his eyes, something he hadn't seen in a long time. "I've been thinking." He began, his voice filled with hope. "I think it's time for me to meet Nathan. I think it's time for me to be the father I should have been all those years ago." Sophie looked at him, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She knew this would be a difficult step, but she also knew it was the right one. "You're ready," she said softly, her hand resting gently on his. "We'll face it together." And so the next chapter began. Michael reached out to Rebecca, asking if he could meet Nathan. Rebecca, although hesitant, agreed. She knew it was the right thing to do for Michael, for Nathan, and for herself. It was time to close the door on the past and open a new one where they could all move forward, no longer held back by secrets and pain. When the day finally came for Michael to meet Nathan, the moment was filled with anticipation and tension. Michael, standing nervously outside Rebecca's house, waited for Nathan to arrive. When the door opened and Nathan stepped out, there was a moment of silence as their eyes met. For a brief second, time seemed to stand still. Nathan was older now, but Michael could still see the traces of the boy he once thought was lost to him. His heart raced as he realized that despite the years that had passed, this was his son. "Hi, Nathan." Michael said, his voice shaking slightly. Nathan looked at him, uncertain but curious. "Hi," he replied, his voice steady but filled with caution. In that moment, Michael knew that he couldn't undo the past, but he could create a future. A future where honesty, love, and forgiveness were the foundation of their family. It wouldn't be easy, but they had time. Time to heal, to grow, and to rebuild what had been broken. And as Michael reached out to shake Nathan's hand, he realized that sometimes it's not about getting what you want. It's about learning from the past, accepting what you can't change, and embracing the future with open arms. How do you think Michael's decision to meet Nathan will affect his relationship with Sophie? Do you think they can move forward after all the secrets? If you were in Rebecca's shoes, how would you have handled Michael's request to meet Nathan? Would you have agreed, or would you have hesitated? What do you think is the most important lesson Michael has learned throughout this journey? If you enjoyed this story, comment the number 100 below. Where are you watching from? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to share this video with your friends.